Welcome to the Lawyerist Podcast, a series of conversations about law practice. Each week, we talk with legal entrepreneurs and innovators about building a successful law practice in today's challenging and constantly changing legal market. And now, here are your hosts.
Hi, I'm Sam Glover, and this week Stephanie is in the office, so we kicked Aaron out to record the intro.
Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie Everett, and this is episode 229 of the Lawyerist Podcast, part of the Legal Talk Network. Today, we're talking with Megan Zavieh about podcasting as a marketing tactic.
So Stephanie, welcome to the podcast intro.
Thank you, Sam.
This is your first time, isn't it?
As an intro, yes.
Awesome. So you were just telling me, because this is Client Communication Week, and we've been talking about the client experience this month, and you had a great tip because we were talking about how important it is to listen during your intake or trial and not just occupy yourself with typing on a laptop or taking notes, and you had a great tip. So maybe you can tell us about it.
Yeah, so you know that you want to be active listening, and so often when we're listening, what we're really doing is thinking of our response, and that's what takes up our brain energy. So my tip is if you're in a client interview, for example, and it's an initial consultation, you probably know the 10 or 12 or 15 pain points that your client could potentially have.
Yep.
You're a family law lawyer, you've heard it all before. You're a real estate lawyer, you've heard it all before. Well, go ahead and take those pain points and create a cheat sheet for yourself that has those things listed on it with check marks, right? So then as we're talking and you tell me that's an issue, now I can just put a little check there.
Love that.
And I can still stay focused on you and look at you and watch you and listen to you. And I'm not worried about capturing that pain point because I've got it right there. Maybe I make minimal notes, but then I don't have to worry about how I'm going to respond. And then when the conversation comes, I'm like, okay, now I know what we need to discuss.
I really like that because it helps you make sure that you key in on the important issues that are going to make the difference. And also it helps with the part where what you're trying to get out of that initial consultation is just figuring out, does this person have a legal problem I can help solve? And you can just look down at your cheat sheet and go, yep, no, but yes, and then you can just get right to the heart of what you need to know out of that conversation. So I love that.
Yeah. You can even take it one step further, and really you should have an agenda or script for all of your intake processes. Totally. Part of it could even include red flags, like you could have on the margin, and maybe you're even marking, oh, there was a red flag. Maybe I don't want to take that client.
Maybe be careful about not showing that to the person in front of you, though.
Yes, it could be symbols. It could be shorthand. It could be a thing. But the idea is now that you've built that out, how much easier is it going to be then when you're ready to train someone else in your office to do that conversation, which is sort of the advanced level step.
Plus, whenever I've gone back to my notes, I'm always like, what did I mean by that? And what, where's the thing that I know they said this thing that now feels important to me and I didn't write it down? And so that feels like a really good way to make sure you capture the important bits.
Yeah. But I think the takeaway is listen.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And now here's my conversation with Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Zavieh, and I save lawyers' careers. I'm a state bar defense lawyer, defending lawyers primarily in California against disciplinary violations. And I also help new lawyers become members of the bar through the moral character process.
Welcome back to the podcast, Megan, for your 5th appearance. I can hardly believe.
Thanks, Sam.
I think you've been on more podcasts than anybody but me.
Ooh, that's exciting. Well, and Aaron.
And maybe
Don't
Aaron
forget
Gerson saying. Yep. Well, let's check in because I was sort of going through your appearances on our podcast, and we've talked about, Apple versus the FBI. We've talked about some of the challenges you've overcome in your practice. We've talked about getting unstuck and reinventing your law practice. And we've talked about ethically problematic marketing strategies. So we've kind of run across the board, but I'd love to check in with you on just what does your practice look like today and how are things?
Well, things are great. My practice is really growing and become very fulfilling. And every so often I sit back and look at how far it's come and I'm just really kind of blown away and excited.
It has really been fun to watch you grow and develop over the last few years, for sure.
Oh, thank you. Each time one of your conferences comes up, so what used to be TBD Law and now LabCon, I can't help but reflect and look back before the first one and today. And it's just so completely different.
I also noticed that, I mean, you've gone all the way up to a high B on the scorecard at this point too. So,
I have. And that like brings me some personal satisfaction.
It's a huge accomplishment.
Well, when you first announced the scorecard and I took it, I was a little embarrassed and depressed
You're
by
really
it.
salty about it, yeah.
But yeah, things have changed a lot. I've learned so much. And in fact, I'm getting ready to attend at Vanderbilt Law, their failure camp put on by Kat Moon there. And I pitched a failure story to kick off the conference as a bunch of people sitting around a campfire telling failure stories. And it was a little bit unnerving to write it out, but I couldn't help but sort of be honest in my telling. And now I get to tell this story. So I'm pretty excited about it. That I'll be able to do that at failure camp.
So the scorecard is your failure story?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, but it illustrates part of what my failure story is, basically having done really well prior to attempting my own businesses that were not always law firms. And then not knowing how little I knew, just having no appreciation for how little I knew. And the scorecard kind of fits into that. Like when I launched my law practice, I probably would not have built something I'm as happy to be part of as I am today had I not met the lawyerist crew and then what's grown from there. But the scorecard illustrates all of the things that you really need to know to be running a successful law practice. And yeah, I kind of didn't know any of those back when I started. And I was okay.
But you're really good evidence that you can build up that foundation, then move on and build on top of it. So
absolutely. And I've done that a lot over the last few years. So you asked me, what does it look like today? I'm busy, but in a good way. I've started to build a team. I have an amazing assistant, and I was like the last person to delegate anything. I was horrible. And I now have somebody who actually comes to me and is like, I'm taking this from you. You're doing too much of this. She's amazing. I have a marketing team now that help me on the back end. Like I've just got a lot of people supporting me in a different way than I ever.
But to be clear, you're still a solo.
I'm a solo. There's no lawyers. I don't want, well, right now anyway, I don't want other lawyers involved. But I've built a team around me to support me so that my practice doesn't overrun my life. And I now am able to have much better integration of my work and my life. And I do things nothing like a traditional law firm in terms of how I work each day, but I serve more clients than ever. I travel less than ever, which is fantastic. And I've really built something that I'm not only proud of, but I love working on every day.
So I know the core of your practice is still, representing lawyers who are dealing with ethical problems, complaints or charges. How would you describe that?
Investigations and all the way up to disciplinary charges.
Gotcha. Okay. So I know that's the core, but one of the last times we talked, we were checking in on the Playbook, which is your digital sort of DIY, assisted DIY portal where lawyers who feel competent or want to represent themselves can do it with your help, but all through this digital portal. And last time we checked in on it, you weren't sure. It was pretty early on. You were just hoping to get it up and running. I'd like to check in on it with you now. How's it going? Is it working? Is it having unexpected side effects? What's going on with the Playbook?
Well, it took a while, but it did start selling. I had started to lose faith a bit, which I know most people who ultimately hit success on something have these moments, right? But it had been out there for a while. And I had tried some, I suppose, more conventional digital marketing methods that didn't really speak to me. But like Clickfunnels was one. I had a funnel built and I hated it. I hated it so much.
So were you like trying to push people into it from Facebook or something? Or
yeah, we ran some Facebook ads and pushed people into the funnel and it was working, but I hated it so much that I ended up taking it down. It didn't feel authentic. What was weird was seeing one of my clients in the funnel. I was like, wait a minute. But I just didn't like it. And so I took it down, even though I think it probably would have led to sales. It wasn't authentic for me.
So for listeners, Clickfunnels it's a marketing platform based primarily on sending automated email follow-ups, right?
Yeah. And it has like steps, so you get someone to click your Facebook ad and then they give you their email address in exchange for a free piece. And then you try and upsell them to like a $7 piece. And then you upsell them to the $25 piece. And it's constant upsells. It's the kind of marketing I hate being on the receiving end of. And I felt I had been kind of sold on this. Well, if you're marketing a digital product, this is how you do it. And one of those things I don't know a lot about is marketing, in terms of like the systems out there and what a full-blown marketing person's going to tell you. So I kind of fell for it that okay, well, this is what I'm told is how I'm supposed to do it. I'll try. And I just hated it so much that I took it down. And we didn't do a ton of marketing for a little while. Not really sure what my best option was for it. And the playbook was out there. It could be found, but still suffered from the same problem that helping self-represented lawyers always has suffered from for me, which is if you've chosen self-representation, you seem to be resigned to the idea that you're alone and you don't look for help.
Right.
You don't know that something like that's out there. But then eventually through our email campaigns, because that was still happening, we would email through an automated journey, some just content. It wasn't salesy, to self-represented lawyers going through the state bar discipline system in California, and they would get information that this existed.
Oh, I see. So you're sort of bulk emailing anyone who entered the system.
Right. So we can tell, although we can't reach them until quite far down the line in the process, but eventually we can identify them once charges are filed and they've filed an answer. We know that they're self-represented. We're just providing information, helpful information to people. And eventually that started triggering some sales. And that was super exciting. I'm like, yes, people do want this and it's helpful. And then we started getting feedback. One of the problems that we've all also suffered from this whole time has been not being able to talk to people who are sort of the target market and find out what they might need. And so having some sales has given us the feedback opportunities.
So now you can actually say, like, why are people buying this thing? And that helps you find more of them.
And what do you need different? Because I own the whole thing, which this isn't on some third-party platform. Nobody else has rights to it. It's like, oh, you don't like that the samples are in PDF instead of Word? We can fix that.
Gotcha.
Here you go. And the next day it's fixed.
What are some of the other things you found that people wanted that you had to go and change?
Some people wanted more detail on certain sections that we, really thought were detailed enough. And then they would say, well, I read this and I still had this question. Like, oh, didn't know that question would occur to you there. Okay.
Gotcha.
We can go back into the book and fix it.
When you say we, who do you mean?
Well, I would come up with the content. But then now that I have a team to help me, my web developer can make changes. My assistant will, facilitate those changes, make sure they're done properly, test for bugs. So I'm no longer completely alone doing it.
And I'm trying to remember, what is this technology behind this? I mean, I know fundamentally it's there. I think there's a PDF document, but there's also videos and forms and all kinds of stuff. So like, how do you deliver this to someone?
So it's through a member portal in a WordPress site. And the primary bulk of the material is in an interactive PDF. So it's pretty big. So most people will download it and keep that on their hard drive and click through it and utilize that for the bulk of the information.
And are the videos like in that too, or is there other stuff?
The videos are embedded in the PDF and they can also access them separately. There also is a library of forms. So like if you're in chapter 5 of the book dealing with a particular topic, you go to the forms library or sample library. And, in chapter 5, here's all the things you might need at that stage of your litigation.
Cool. So is it like selling periodically? You don't have to give me exact numbers, although you're welcome to. Like, how is it doing overall? Like, is it a worthwhile experiment and you think it can keep growing or?
Oh, what? Absolutely. It's been selling with increasing regularity. Started out with 0, just crickets. But then once it started, it's been growing. And definitely a worthwhile endeavor. I'm happy to be sort of finally cracking into this, what I've perceived as a need that doesn't know it needs help on this segment. So it's finally getting some play and people are talking about it. I think there's some changes that we'll make. I haven't wanted to invest a ton of energy into making changes that are just from my own head.
Right.
We need
the people
to
aren't actually asking for. Yeah,
exactly. Because it's amazing. Everyone tells me, like, talk to people and see what they need. Yeah, that's amazingly valuable when you're able to actually do it. Yeah. So now that we have, like, one of the things is that users have said they would like to pay over time instead of a lump sum. So we've asked, like, what about a subscription? And they've loved that idea. So there's some changes we need to make in the delivery model to make that make sense, because otherwise you could subscribe for a month and get most of what you need and then cancel. So that's not very useful.
Right. If they just download the whole PDF, then
exactly.
Then
you really could individually download all the forms. It would take you a while, but it could be done. People have also asked for my time, which is something that originally I had tried to make this an entirely standalone product. And now I know that that's just not what people want. They want at least some of my time, but I didn't realize how little of my time would satisfy them.
Oh, really? So
it really surprised me.
People just want 20 minutes on the phone to satisfy their concerns or something?
Yeah. Or can I just send you this and take 15 minutes to quickly glance it over and tell me I'm on the right track?
Yeah.
I'm like, really? That's all? And I've been shocked sometimes because I've given my time to users to say, well, and I've told them things like, tell me when we reach a point where you're happy with how much time I've given you. I said, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop. I will still give you more, but I want to know in your head, when do I hit the point where it satisfies you? And what they tell me, because they'll stop me in the middle at some point and be like, if you stopped right now, I'm totally happy. Really? Already? I have so much more to tell you.
Yeah.
That fear of mine that investing my time in every user was going to be a problem, I'm learning is not such a problem.
Very cool.
So we want to integrate that. Over time, this will evolve. We'll make more and more changes.
Gotcha. And again, it's not the core of your practice, but it's something that you're hoping is an investment in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We need to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to switch gears and talk about how you've marketed your practice, including your podcast. So we'll be back in a minute. With Text Expander, you don't have to waste time retyping things you've already worded perfectly. Instead, just use gathered snippets of information using simple keyboard shortcuts or custom abbreviations. You can capture the important pieces of your emails, directions, messages, and data as snippets so you never have to retype them again. From correcting your personal typos and defining industry terms to whole email templates, reusing your info has never been faster, and it works everywhere you type. Text Expander is available for Mac, Windows, iPhone, and iPad, and now Chrome too. Listeners can get 20% off their first year by visiting textexpander.com/podcast. How cool would it be to grow your practice in your preferred area of law without spending any time or money on business development? Now you can with AROG. When you become a provider on AROG's network, you'll consult with and represent clients on various legal issues, from writing a will to dealing with traffic tickets, bankruptcy, or divorce. AROG does the rest. They'll make it easy for clients to connect with you and even share client feedback so you can keep growing your business. Best of all, AROG pays you directly, and there are absolutely zero out-of-pocket fees to join the network. So what are you waiting for? Visit aroglegal.com/lawyerist. That's ARAG legal.com/lawyerist to learn more about the client growth opportunities in your area. Just enter your zip code and area of law to see the number of AROG members near you. It all adds up to more potential clients and more opportunities to make money for your firm. Expand your client base right now. In fact, more than 90% of AROG members say they are more likely to consult with an attorney when something comes up than if they didn't have legal insurance. Check it out at aroglegal.com/lawyerist. That's ARAG legal.com/lawyerist to get started. There's more to answering a phone call than just pronouncing your name correctly. And I think that's what sets Ruby apart from all the other receptionist services out there. I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of people who work at Ruby, and from top to bottom, it's full of the kind of people you'd love to spend time with. I guess it's something in the coffee they serve. And after all, when someone calls your firm, that means they are going to be spending time with your receptionist. You may think you get to make a first impression when you pick up the phone, but that's not how it works. Maybe your receptionist is just on the call for a minute or two, but that's all it takes to form a first impression. So it's a good idea to make sure your receptionist is the kind of person you'd want your callers to spend time with. It could be the difference between a big case and a big fail. Don't worry, Ruby can handle pronouncing your name right. They'll also help you make a great first impression. And now Ruby can even help you connect with clients right on your website with 24/7 live online chat. You can find out more about Ruby receptionists and how to make a great first impression at callruby.com/lawyeristpod. Okay, we're back. And Megan, so since we last spoke, you started your own podcast.
I have.
Called Lawyers Gone Ethical. I'm curious about, how did you start it? How did you figure out how to do it? And what was your goal for it at the outset?
Well, so starting it was one of those, like, I have this harebrained idea. What if I did an ethics podcast? Mm-hmm. Like, I have a lot of harebrained ideas and they don't always get fully formed and followed up on. But I looked around and I couldn't find that anybody was talking about ethics issues on a podcast. And I've been really surprised. My whole client base, plus friends and colleagues, they always have all these ethics questions. and it's so hard to get answers. And so I thought this would be a really cool platform to just start talking about some of these issues. It's kind of the fun conversations that I have with some of my lawyer friends when I get to geek out on ethics rules. And what if we brought that to the podcast platform?
So your target demographic sounds like lawyers, right? Because all lawyers are always talking about ethics issues, which is a little bit different than, let's say a personal injury lawyer comes up to me and is like, I want to start a podcast. Like people who are injured in a car accident that's not a demographic, right? That's like it's a point in time, and it may affect the rest of your life. But like the point during which people are interested in learning about people who are affected by accidents, it's a really small point in time. It's not like they become subscribers to a podcast for years. There's a piece of information they want for a couple weeks or days or months, whereas your audience is bigger and more durable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are people who, even if they think they don't have legal ethics issues, when they do, they start scouring for information. And lawyers, in my, sort of limited experience of just knowing lawyers, seem to be a lot of podcast consumers.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of legal podcasts out there. And so it's definitely a market of people who are listening to podcasts. And it's one of the avenues that we will look to when we have questions. And by doing a podcast, I build a library of topics. So even if this week isn't like, you don't listen to it every week, or this week's topic doesn't pertain to you, as a lawyer and a podcast listener, when you have questions, that's one of the places you might look. And now we have, 70 or so episodes of content going back, and that'll continue to grow.
Are you doing this weekly, or is it?
Yeah, it's weekly. It is. Cool. And I did have to think about whether it was really going to be worth the effort, because it is a lot of work. Once it gets off the ground, it's not terribly difficult, but it was a big investment of time and resources to get it started and to keep it going. So I did have to kind of think about whether it was worthwhile. But I met Nicole Abood at one of the ClioCon conferences and talked to her because I said, this sounds like a great idea, but is it really? And how hard is this to make it happen? And honestly, without her involvement at the beginning, I can't say for sure I would have made it happen, because she really demystified the process. She taught me a lot, and she took over the bulk of the production for a very long time.
So she's the one who helped you get the thing off the ground. And by the way, Nicole, if you're listening, congratulations.
Absolutely.
Nicole just got married this weekend as of recording. So
she did. We're so happy for her.
Yeah. I met her now husband at, I think, one of the Clio Cloud conferences, actually.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Awesome. So congrats to you, Nicole, if you're listening. But and now she's not doing your work. Like who's editing your podcast then?
Well, so then we went through some transition, and this is one of those points where, something like the work that goes into a podcast, it makes you stop and think, is this really worth it? And I did have to evaluate. She was no longer going to do the production, not just for me, but she was ceasing production.
It's a ton of work. That doesn't surprise me.
It is a ton of work. And I was kind of like, sucker punched. I'm like, what? I can't do this without you. And she worked really hard to transition us. She gave us a lot of options of what we could do to keep the podcast going. We tried another vendor, and just, no one's Nicole. And so we just were dissatisfied. So what we ended up doing was we recently brought production in-house. So my assistant manages all the production now. We have an outside editor, and we have an outside graphic designer, who are people Nicole has used as well. They're already familiar with me, with the show, with what we like. And we don't wholesale outsource anymore. So now, we've got to be a little bit more on top of it, but we also have a lot more control than having an entirely third-party vendor handling it. And it's working out really, really well. Very happy with it.
I think one of the things about producing a podcast that has been true for me is kind of knowing what you aren't going to be good at, or that you don't want to learn. And like, I didn't want to learn how to edit the podcast.
Yeah.
So we ended up hiring Paul soon after I guess we had another editor at the beginning, and now Paul's been with us for a long time. And being able to hand it off to somebody competent who can do the work for you is so refreshing.
Oh, absolutely. It's not like, honestly, it's too much work and too much time if you can't give it to someone whose specialty it is to make that piece happen, and just know it's going to be done right. when you have to listen to every episode to make sure it's done right, or, review every graphic and make sure you don't look like an idiot in the graphic, like that's too much. You just can't do that.
I think that's what people don't quite realize about podcast editing is, right, if you've recorded an hour-long interview, editing it at a minimum is going to take an hour. And that's only if you're an insanely productive person, right? Editing a 1-hour podcast is probably going to take 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
If you're a lawyer and you're trying to do that, or if you're anybody and trying to do that on top of anything else, it's just nearly impossible.
Yeah, it's way too much if you're trying to do it yourself.
So how do you assess whether or not the podcast was worthwhile?
Well, it's a good question. And like I said, we really had to evaluate at one point there whether it was worth it. So one of the many things that have changed around here for me is that we actually are tracking a lot more KPIs, key performance indicators, than before. That was one of those areas. Talk about failing on the scorecard. And also attending multiple sessions at conferences about them and just leaving with my head spinning, trying to read books and not understanding them. I now have an amazing system, thanks to my assistant, and she pulls in all this data every month. And one of them is, always trying to find out where people are coming from and, why are they calling me? Why did they book a consultation with me? We've been asking that question for years. We've not always gotten very good answers.
Yeah, a lot of people don't really understand. And I mean, if you think about the way we navigate the internet, I don't always know how I wound up on your website. So I get it.
It's true.
But it's frustrating.
But it is frustrating. But we've been able to start identifying more and more people coming who say, I listened to you on your podcast. And in fact, I had one call from someone that really hit home for me. He said this crazy ethics issue had hit him. He was really flipping out. It wasn't discipline. This is one of the things people don't realize is that I don't just get calls because you got a letter from the bar. I get calls from people who have a client flipping out on them, or they're not sure what to do next in a situation, right? And they recognize, oh, I should ask an ethics lawyer, can I do this? So he had this ethics situation pop up and he goes, well, I thought to myself, I don't know any ethics lawyers. Wait, yes, I do. The one from the podcast. And I was like, yes.
That's very cool.
You're clicking. It's making it work. And so we were able to look back at those questions of where did you hear about me? There were enough people who were saying, I came from the podcast. And then we went through, I keep an email folder for the podcast where I do get emails from listeners.
Yeah, I saw that you do a mailbag every once in a while.
I do. And also sometimes it's just like somebody local who's like, hey, by the way, I'm a California lawyer too, and I listen to your podcast. That happened to me. They live by my kids' school, and I was so excited. There's somebody else here. So we looked back and we're like, people are listening. And we looked at the downloads and the numbers were, making me very happy. And I'm like, okay, people are out there, they're listening, they're converting to actual business. Everything else across the board, we can see that things are up and the podcast is a piece.
Yeah.
There's no reason to stop. So maybe I can't say I got 3 new clients this month from the podcast, but I can see it's making a difference.
Do you stop and think about like what else could be making that difference? Is there anything else you could reasonably attribute it to?
Well, I do plenty of other content, putting out their content marketing, whatever phrase you want to use for it. So I do put information out that's helpful, but it's hard sometimes to pinpoint, this is because of the podcast and this is because of an article. This is because of a speaking engagement. So I can't always exactly pinpoint, but I know that the podcast is a piece of what I do that overall is contributing. And I don't see a reason to mess with my blend.
That's good to know. If another lawyer were going to be starting a podcast, which is, I feel like this, I just talked with Bob Ambrogi in a recent episode about the state of legal podcasting. He has his own ideas, but I'm curious how you would talk to a lawyer who's like, hey, I see you're doing a podcast. How's that going? And should I do one myself?
Well, I think there's a lot to think about. And one of the points that I would raise is what you touched on earlier, like who's your audience? Because if your client base is constantly changing, there are people who have a legal need at a particular time and then they don't anymore. That's not going to be a great audience. If your point of having a podcast is to bring clients in. Now, if you're trying to simply establish yourself as an expert in a field, so say personal injury, workers' comp, divorce law, whatever it is that you do, you want to be able to put on your website that you podcast on it, right? You're such an expert that you've got this thing out there. Okay, you can do that. If you honestly think it's going to help, and you've got to evaluate that, right? There's no one else doing it in your area. Do you find your client base to be podcast listeners generally? Like, are these just people who are going to be impressed by a podcast, even if they don't listen to it?
Mm-hmm.
Then maybe you want to do it, but then I wouldn't do it weekly. I would do it, because you're not really honestly going to have a ton of listeners all the time because you have this transient base of clients, but you could do it, say, monthly. So you're not biting off a huge obligation for yourself, but you're still getting this at least perceived benefit of having the podcast and looking like an expert. But you've really got to think about it.
It is really hard not to publish a podcast regularly.
Yeah, if you're not doing, I think monthly is a big space between, but definitely the most space between that I think anyone should be doing if you're the least bit serious about it. But you've got to recognize like what it's being used for and if people are really going to be listening. Now, I've skipped a week before. I try not to, but I have. Life happens. Yeah. And sometimes you just don't have an episode ready. And like I traveled for a month last year and we pre-recorded like 8 episodes so that I didn't have to jump in right away when I got back. And yet I still managed to have trouble with that first week when I went to record. I'm like, geez, I've gotten so used to not having to do it. So it does happen. But you know what? I got calls. I had people wondering why I didn't have an episode that week. I'm like, oh, people are actually watching for this. Yeah. Like they're noticing. So it's very much shooting yourself in the foot if you put yourself out there as having a podcast and then don't publish it as regularly as people expect. So if you were considering putting one out and investing your time and resources into it, you've got to make sure that people are actually going to hear it, who are going to be interested in your services or whatever it is that your purpose is behind putting the podcast out there, and then get it out there on a regular basis.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Well, and I suppose, thinking about your podcast as it's in the same way as, a blog was, people come back to read again and again. Now we think of blogs as search engine tools and things like that. But a podcast is in even more pure, like people are subscribing because they want new episodes, that kind of a thing.
They absolutely are. And just like if you think about email marketing, right, you'll see that if you're going to do a newsletter, it's only going to be effective if it's sent regularly. There's no point in sending one in May, then in December, maybe in April, like whenever you get around to it. Like either do it or don't.
Right.
And it's the same thing with a podcast. Either stick to a schedule or just don't do it, because then you kind of look sloppy. And honestly, I don't want it. Like if I'm searching for a new podcast and I, find a title that looks interesting and I go to their episodes and the dates are all over the place, I'm like, oh, okay. I just immediately have an impression of this podcast without ever hitting play.
Right. Yeah, for sure. That makes a ton of sense. Megan Zavieh, thank you so much for coming back on our podcast for round 5. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
I'm sure we'll have you back again to check in more. And good luck on your podcast.
Thank you.
Make sure to catch next week's episode of the Lawyerist Podcast by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast app. And please leave a rating to help other people find our show. You can find the notes for today's episode on lawyerist.com/podcast.
The Lawyerist Podcast is produced with help from Lindsay Calhoun and edited by Paul Fisher. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not endorsed by Legal Talk Network. Nothing said in this podcast is legal advice for you.